Wanted to start with one topic for you, Von Miller. I think I saw a post you had up there on the site earlier. Why don't you break down? I mean, obviously Von has mentioned it being, important to him, playing his old team. Obviously, he played for the Rams for a cup of coffee, but that I don't think held any. The Bills have played the Rams a few times now. That hasn't really held a ton of weight, but this is pretty important. Obviously, the Bills played the Broncos last year. Von was not in the form that he's in today. I guess, what are some of your initial reactions with Von Miller getting traded first, obviously, and then signing the big deal with Buffalo, and now him coming back to disrupt the momentum of the Broncos? I guess tell me about that from your perspective.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when Von was traded to the Rams, we all knew it was a distinct possibility because of the contract year and all that stuff. But it still came as a surprise because he's such a franchise linchpin and, one of the most legendary Broncos of all time, the Super Bowl 50 MVP thing, perennial Pro Bowler and All Pro. I mean, he's part of the fabric, right? So when it happened, Von, he was stunned by it. And while I wouldn't say we were stunned by it, there was some surprise that it was actually going to happen. And, he got a little verklempt when the cameras caught up to him, leaving the facility after he cleared out all his stuff and it was done. And, it was obviously quite difficult for him, but he fortunately landed on his feet. It was important for the Broncos, if they were going to trade him, to get not only a good haul that, represented what he was as a player at that time, but trade him somewhere where he'd have a chance to go and compete. And like you said, ended up being a cup of coffee with the Rams, but he did get a second Lombardi, a second ring. So really cool for him. He's not the player that he once was. Father Time is undefeated. And but still, he's a special player to Broncos country. He's probably up there on the Mount Rushmore. Everyone who covers the Broncos and fans have their own unique Mount Rushmore, but there's an argument: Floyd Little, John Elway, Peyton Manning, Von Miller. You could maybe put Champ Bailey in there, or a few others that you could mix match. Terrell Davis, right? But Von Miller, I don't know. I guess Floyd Little, because of what he represented to the franchise, he was technically, they called him the franchise. That was his nickname, but didn't bring home a Super Bowl. So I myself would have a little bit of a problem putting Little on. So for me, it would be Elway, Peyton, Miller, Davis. That would be the Mount Rushmore. So that's how important he is to Broncos country.
Very nice.
Hey, Chad. So I tweeted yesterday, ironically enough, that as much as Von Miller being a former Bronco is a storyline this week, let's not forget the fact that Josh Allen could have been a current Bronco, because I remember that clip that came out over the summer of John Elway on Pardon My Take saying that was probably the biggest mistake of his GM days, is passing up on Josh Allen at the number 5 overall pick and going with Bradley Chubb. So it seems like you guys have landed on your feet pretty nicely here. Bo Nix seems to be a promising young rookie. And I think that, like Kevin said, I think that this team is very comparable to like the 2019 Bills when Allen was on that ascension.
Right.
Really had that first good year, and the Bills won the division. Or was that? No, that was Brady. Brady was
right
still
before they
in the
won.
AFC. So yeah, it was a wild card team, but you could tell that big things were coming. So just kind of speak on that perspective now about missing out on Josh Allen, and then translate that into, maybe you can segue into what life is like now with Bo Nix.
Yeah, dude, it was funny to hear Elway finally just admit the truth, right? And we all knew. I mean, personally, I understood why he held out slightly. I mean, I understood it doesn't mean I agreed with it. He was still hoping. You got to remember, if you go back to the spring of 2018, you were entering the third offseason of the Paxton Lynch experiment. And up to that point, whom they had drafted in the first round in 2016, he was still, Elway, still hoping that Lynch was going to turn a corner. Something was going to click. He didn't want to signal to the world his failure on the pick. He didn't want to fully move on and give up. And so he took a chance. And instead of Allen, he took Bradley Chubb, and he lived to vastly regret it. Now, there's an argument to be made on whether Josh Allen, and this is not to cast aspersions on Allen, he's a stud. We all know what he is. But there is an argument to be made. I hear people make it in my chat almost every night when the subject of the Bills comes up, and the regret and the Broncos passing on him, especially being that he was just up the road, where he played college football. And that is that would he have become the same player that he is had he landed in that pit of incompetence and misery at that time that was Denver Broncos football, but especially Denver Broncos offensive football. You know, there was a lot of problems over those years, but it was never the defense. It was always what was happening on offense, coaching snafus, failures to launch at the QB level. So, you know, would he have thrived in the same way with a Billy Musgrave as the OC in Denver, or Rich Scangarello? Maybe. I don't know. I'm just saying there's an argument to be made, but it is ironic how that shook out. And it was, I think, gratifying somewhat for Broncos fans to hear it from Elway. Yeah, sorry, guys, I messed up. And honestly, it's one of the reasons why he kind of had to step out and fade off a little bit in ignominy, because he could not get the quarterback position right amongst his head coaching bad decisions too, post Gary Kubiak stepping down. By the way, he got his first two right. John Fox, Gary Kubiak. Gary Kubiak and Elway were supposed to ride off into the sunset together. You know, they were old. They came to Denver as rookies together, old roommates, best buds. It was his offensive coordinator when he won 2 Super Bowls. And the plan was for that to happen. And it was the Paxton Lynch pick that created some discord amongst them because it surprised Kubiak. They weren't on the same page there. And so there was this internal battle with Elway in the front office trying to strong-arm Kube to play Lynch as a rookie, and he didn't want to. He played Simeon, a second-year, 7th-round pick. So I'm digressing a little bit, but you know, you kind of have to walk the quarterback desert a little bit. And Bills fans know this. You feel this pain. You have to walk that desert a little bit to finally kind of, I don't want to say deserve, what's a better, maybe appreciate what it's like to finally get your guy. And there's no question, Kevin, that the Broncos feel like they've got their guy. And like you said, we're seeing a glimpse of what this could possibly be in the future. And last thing, it's funny you bring up those parallels, because as I was coming down to my office to join you guys, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, you know, it's interesting because the Broncos are going into this wild card into the playoffs. Like, you know, they're playing with house money, right? Like they're kind of ahead of schedule on where, let's face it, almost anyone expected them to be, including the most optimistic fans. And it reminded me of that first bite at the apple that Josh Allen had when the Bills made the playoffs for the first time with him.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny you say that because Jordan Phillips said that today too. He was on One Bills Live and they asked him his opinions on this Broncos team. And he was like, honestly, it reminds me of our team in 2019. Good defense, feisty defense. They force those turnovers and you have a bright young star at quarterback. You get those sparks on offense, but you're just not all the way there yet. And talking about that game, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but I mean, the Bills were close to pulling off that upset in Houston. There was that weird, what was it, like the touchdown or something with the officiating.
They made up a rule in that game, yeah.
Yeah, like the Pat DeMarco 50-yard pass, like the Allen, what did he do? He like flipped it back to Dawson Knox. Like there were a lot of weird things. So the Bills were very close, and you could see that like once they got buttoned up, they were going to be a force to be reckoned with. And then sure enough, 2020, here we go. So I'm wondering if Denver is going to follow that same trajectory.
Well, the one thing that gives me a lot of faith is that they will, is not just that, hey, year one, Bo Nix, you made it to the playoffs, but you have the right quarterback coach combination. And I was one of those guys in the draft. I'm not a draft guy. I'm too busy with the managing of the site and covering the news and everything else to be the draft nerd that I once was. But I wanted Bo Nix. And even though he ended up being the 6th quarterback off the board, I was like, dude, for the Broncos in terms of fit, I mean, and I'm not just saying like I'm going off of reading about everybody comparing him to Drew Brees, but you turn on the tape and watch what he did at Oregon. It's like, dude, this guy would thrive with Sean Payton. And it's not only that, but Sean Payton, the big reason he wanted out of the Russell Wilson business was the turnovers and the not being on schedule stuff. You could never count on him for the ball to be out on time. His blockers could never count on him to be in the spot. And it was just chaos. And it was not something Sean Payton was used to. And it was not something he was willing to suffer. And the ownership gave him that prerogative when they hired him. He's like, hey, I'll give it a go since you guys went all in on Russ. But I need to know that I have the power to pull the plug if it comes to that. And that's what happened. But with Bo Nix, you see the skill set, you saw the fit relative to Sean Payton. But beyond that, also just a straight up stubbornness to avoid the sacks and the turnovers. Like I'm actually a little bit surprised the number of picks he finished with this season, but from a sack perspective, first of all, no lost fumbles. Russell Wilson, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, I think it was 10 fumbles last season with the Broncos.
Sounds right.
Under Sean Payton, 6 or 7 of them lost fumbles, okay? And that doesn't count any of the picks. But with Bo, no lost fumbles and third fewest sacks in the NFL as a rookie. That's another metric that people are underappreciating in terms of what it portends for the Broncos moving forward. So, yeah, that combined with the defense and how young the defense is, I like Denver's outlook moving forward.